Right, let's get you more now on the UN Security Council meeting on Libya and Washington's claims of airstrikes in the country. CCTV's Liling joins us live from the UN in New York, while Kate Fisher's coming to us live from Washington. Liling, let's begin with you. Tell us more about this meeting that the UN Security Council is holding on Libya. Do we expect to see anything concrete come out of this?
Well, yes, the resolution aims to do two things, Famida. The first is to tighten the arms embargo and also to expand sanctions against people and entities that the Security Council deemed to be escalating the Libyan conflict and destabilizing the political process, as well as those who have or who are committing human rights abuses. Now, the sanctions are expanded to apply to those who carry out air, land, and seaport attacks against Libya, who attack state institutions, as well as foreign missions on the ground in the country, and those who support armed groups and criminal networks in exploiting the country's crude oil and natural resources. Now, the Council is also tightening its arms embargo by enlisting other countries to monitor the flow of cargo from their ports and their airports, to seize and dispose of prohibited items, and also to notify the Council of the seizures. The point of all this is to address the escalating conflict in Libya, as well as the rising toll on the civilian population, and also to enable the country's political process to complete without further disruption. As to whether any concrete outcome can come from this, it depends on whether the threat of these sanctions can change the behavior of warring factions on the ground, and perhaps the threat themselves could serve as a deterrent, a sufficient deterrent against escalation. And if not, the Security Council has the option of imposing these sanctions and further expanding them down the road. Amida?
Now, Kate, you're in Washington, and the United States has said it wants a political solution to the crisis. Meanwhile, Egypt is promising full support to Libya, which essentially opens the door to a possible exchange of arms. What does the US say about that?
Well, the US is very concerned about increased violence in Libya. Both the State Department and the Pentagon saying that they do not believe that violence is the answer to Libya's problems, and that they should be resolved through peaceful politics and good governance. In reference to those airstrikes that they believe were carried out by the UAE and Egypt, they released a joint statement with other countries, Britain, France, etc., saying they believe outside interference in Libya exacerbates current divisions and undermines its democratic transition, saying they do not believe violence is the answer. It's also been widely reported that the US was not informed before these airstrikes took place, which perhaps points to a fall in the influence of the White House and a decline in Obama, the president's influence in the region. But there are others who say they just simply can't believe that the US did not know about these in advance. The UAE and the US are long-term strong partners, and also the very fact that these planes went into Libya would surely have been picked up on US satellite radar systems. So there is some debate here about who knew what and when, but certainly other analysts suggesting that this is a game changer for the US and for relations in the region. This is the first time that two Arab nations have joined together to combat Islamists in a third Arab nation without the influence or the help of the US.
Now, Liling, looking at those claims of airstrikes by the UAE and Egypt, has the UN had similar sentiments around non-interference? What have they had to say?
If the UN has similar sentiments, it's all behind closed doors. So far, publicly, the United Nations Security Council has been very tight-lipped about this, very cautious about pointing fingers. Bear in mind that a lot of this information that we're getting, these allegations that the UAE and Egypt are responsible, we're getting all this from news media reports citing unnamed senior UN officials, and without a direct and specific official comment or statement from the White House pointing fingers at both of these countries, the UN is understandably hesitant to point fingers themselves. But that said, there is no contest that these airstrikes had occurred, and in a briefing to the Council by the Special Envoy to Libya, Tariq Mitri, he made references to this airstrike without actually naming who they thought was behind them. Now, the Council is currently meeting in consultations where it's expected that they are discussing the broader conflict, the escalation of the conflict in Libya, but also who was responsible for these airstrikes. But all this is taking place behind closed doors for now.
Now, Kate, the Pentagon is accusing the UAE and Egypt of being involved in those airstrikes. Is there any evidence or any clarity that has come forward around supporting that claim? We heard earlier John Kirby, spokesperson, he didn't say very much.
Indeed, just like the UN, officials in the Pentagon and the State Department are remaining tight-lipped about this. They're not giving anything away. They're not even saying whether they were notified or not before this happened. They believe that it was, John Kirby, as you mentioned there, said that they didn't know anything about this when the first strike happened. It wasn't until the second at the weekend that he said they gained more information. He didn't say how he got that information. He just said that they gained information that the UAE and Egypt had conducted these airstrikes in, and I quote, some fashion. So really very scant details. And when he was pushed on this, he said that reporters should address the governments of Egypt and the UAE and ask their questions to them. He had no more information, and he said he refused to go into the details of America's diplomacy. So giving very little away other than to say that he believed that the strikes were the responsibility of Egypt and the United Arab Emirates.
All right, Kate, thanks very much for those details. We're speaking there to Kate Fisher in Washington, as well as CCTV's Liling outside the UN in New York.